This is Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana University basketball discussion, hosted by Inside the Hall founder and editor, Alex Bozich. Since 2007, Inside the Hall has been trusted by IU fans across the globe to be the one-stop shop for IU basketball news, commentary, and analysis. Join us over at InsideTheHall.com. That's InsideTheHall.com.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Podcast on the Brink. And there's a lot to discuss since the last time we were with you about a week and a half ago. Dylan Burkhart joined us, and we kind of previewed the start of the basketball season. And at that point, we were, I think, wondering what this season would look like to start. But in terms of being able to get some games out of the way for Indiana, they've played now 4 in the span of, I think, 8 days. And to help us react to what we've seen so far, good friend of mine, obviously, co-founder of Inside the Hall, and the man who writes the minute after and the film session after every game, Ryan Corazza. Welcome back to Podcast on the Brink.
Thank you. Happy to be here. I'm just scanning the web right now, looking to see if I can find any Bruce Hornsby at the Biltmore bootlegs, So I want to be able to experience that.
I didn't even – it's good that you brought that up because I'd kind of forgotten about it after the game ended, and I was focused on kind of doing everything that I do after games in terms of press conferences and getting everything put up on the site. But now that you mentioned it, Jason Benetti, I think, does a great job with announcing. Obviously, Ryan and I are both White Sox fans, so we're familiar with his work, and he does a lot of college basketball. But, the first 2 days of Bill Walton, there was obviously a lot of interesting things to come out of his mouth. And that's how it always is with Walton. You kind of have to take him for what he is, and there's not going to be a lot of talking about the actual game. But today, they lost me with with how that went down late in the first half. What was your reaction? Were you surprised that ESPN just kind of? I mean, it was basically like the 3 guys were having a Zoom call, and the game was kind of going on in the background.
Well, when it went to halftime, the ESPN crew was like, that was the most 2020 thing. And it just, it kind of was in some ways. But I don't know. It was a little bit of like a bridge too far. I feel like Walton just has like his own thing and his own energy. And ESPN seems to really be okay with it. And they just kind of let him do his thing. And I understand that there are some people that like it. There's some good entertainment with it. But then when we brought in one of his buddies and went to like this almost like long form interview, it was like they were having it was like a Zoom podcast.
It was basically like Bill. It almost felt like Bill told them like before he was going to do this, like if I'm going to do 3 straight days of games, 2 a day, like at some point I just want to bring a friend in for part of the broadcast and just talk about whatever I want. And it was like, at the expense of people who are actually trying to pay attention to the game, we've got these 3 faces over on the side of the screen with the game just kind of going on with no sound on the side. So it was bizarre, but I think everybody kind of, once Indiana got back out there for the second half and took control of the game, the tweets about it stopped and people forgot about it. But I want to go kind of back to this whole week in Maui. Obviously, neither you or I were there. And actually, last time Indiana was in Maui, you were in actual the Lahaina Civic Center for the games. So what a change for our student writer Tyler making the trek during a pandemic to go out to Asheville. So props to him. Did a great job with the coverage all week. But
great stuff.
I kind of think it's good that we waited until now to talk about these 3 games because you had a little bit of everything. You had optimism after the first day when they beat Providence convincingly. You had doom and gloom yesterday when they looked totally inept against Texas. And then today they come out and beat what I think is going to be a pretty good in the Pac-12 Stanford team. Just from a big picture, what did you learn from these 3 days about this Indiana team that maybe you didn't know or you were curious about coming into this?
Well, I think in these 3 games, and something I wrote about after this one, they certainly are still defending at a pretty high level. They held each team to under a point per possession. So I think that's been a pretty good constant so far this year. Heading back to the Tennessee Tech game as well. And, the 4th year here in the Miller era, I think we're starting to see that that's something that is kind of the identity of this team. Of course, on the flip side, the thorn in the side of this team throughout his tenure as well has been the shooting issues. And I mean, that Texas game, I think the reason, usually when there's a bad loss, people tend to kind of, as Miller said after this game, that, everyone else thought the sky was falling, but we kind of, we're a good group and we kind of just soldier through the next game here. But it's one of those things that it's so known by anyone who's watched this team and fans that have watched this team that this 3-point shooting and kind of an inability to space the floor in years previous as well has just been the glaring weakness. And so for it to, I think everyone's looking for that very strongly this year. And I think that Texas game, when you really dig into some of the numbers, how bad they are historically, it was a huge cause for concern. And I just think it's what everyone's looking for. And it just stuck out pretty bad in that game. That said, I do feel like this team, because, I don't know if Trayce Jackson-Davis is not going to score 30 plus every night. But I think this team, because he's a real star and they can play through him, there's that. And then I think it might be about who is taking those 3-pointers around him. I think guys like Rob Phinisee should be probably shooting more. I think, once Al Durham's healthy, he's someone that should also kind of be in the mix for the bulk of the shots. And that might help them, get up to that 35. I don't know if they're going to get to, 37, 39%. I'm a little dubious that this team is going to be any better than average and maybe shooting 34 or 35% from 3. And they might not even shoot that well, but I think who's taking them should be something that we're looking at here. Cause we were talking before we got on, and, Khristian Lander has taken the most out of anyone on the team, and he's 2 of 13 right now, which is about 15%.
Yeah, it's just kind of looking through the stats here. The thing that kind of stands out to me right now that I think from an offensive perspective is a positive is how many opportunities right now that Trayce Jackson-Davis is getting. His usage rate, just in terms of possessions used right now, and this is obviously going to change because we're so early in the season and these numbers update constantly. They'll be different by, the time we're done recording this podcast when other games kind of drop in. But right now, he's using 34.4% of Indiana's possessions, which I think is a positive. And that was something I kind of wrote about earlier in the preseason. I think over the summer, I looked at a lot of the Big Ten's best bigs from last season. And Trayce Jackson-Davis kind of stood out from the standpoint of he only used 21.8% of Indiana's possessions last year. And for how efficient of a player he is, last year I thought that was too low. He obviously had a really good year. He was a freshman. But you look at how Indiana's offense has kind of struggled over the years under Archie Miller, and you say you have this dynamic big guy who doesn't really shoot that much outside of 10 feet, but when he does get the ball in a position to score, he usually, gets it, in the basket or gets to the free throw line. And I think it's encouraging so far that he is as big of a focal point of the offense as he's been. I mean, right now he's again early, but he's in the top 10 of the Ken Palm Player of the Year standings, and that tracks things like efficiency and usage and things like that. And so that's, I think, a positive. On the downside, and I think this is the thing that we're going to continue to focus on as long as it's an issue is, their 3-point shooting right now is, as a team, 29.3%. And my concern there is, it's a small sample size, right? It's only 4 games, but we've seen 3 previous years of just really inept shooting from the perimeter. There's no other way to talk about it than to say that Indiana has not been good enough as a 3-point shooting team. And so I wonder, and I think we saw it against Texas a little bit when they can't make anything from the perimeter, and you have basically only Trayce had 17 points against Texas, but nobody else really stepped up. I mean, you had a day where Armond Franklin against Texas only scored 6 points, Thompson 4, totally different than the output that you saw against Stanford. I wonder what Indiana has consistently beyond Trayce Jackson-Davis, and I think that's where the 3-point shooting is going to have to come through at times, because when we get into the Big Ten play, ultimately teams are more familiar with what you're going to do, and there's some of the best coaching in the country. It's a little bit different playing 3 games in 3 days. There's not a whole lot of advanced preparation and scouting, and these teams aren't as familiar with each other. And so I wonder, and I'm curious if you have any kind of thoughts on just Indiana's offense right now as a whole, what you saw in these 3 games, and if there's any kind of cause for concern with kind of the continued, basically non-existent 3-point shooting. I mean, they're let's see, I'm looking here. They're not getting. It looks like they're generating only 17.5% of their points from behind the 3-point line, which is not a whole lot. 236 in the country right now, and I just wonder, their defense is obviously good, but the offense to me continues to be a bit of a concern.
Yeah, I think one thing when we're thinking about Jackson-Davis and then what's around him, I think sometimes I haven't dove into the film of these 3 games yet, but one thing I'm noticing is I think so often when we think of a big man, it's like, okay, they're down on the low block, and it's like if they get doubled, they're just kicking out to the perimeter, right? And there should be an open shooter, or it's kicking out to the perimeter and swinging it around to the opposite corner, or even the big man, making a skip pass to the other side of the court. But I noticed in these games that they're also using him more than I feel like they did last year in terms of like the left high post. And I think when he's facing the basket as opposed to back to the basket, there's opportunities if they're going to bring a double, or if he's just kind of has a different vision where they're running guys off the baseline, or, Trayce Thompson, who's obviously an improved offensive player as well, is also there as kind of a safety valve. If his man pinches over, then Jackson-Davis can pass to him. So I'm just wondering if as Jackson-Davis gets a lot of attention on him. I mean, there were times in some of these games where I feel like the entire team was on him, right? There's like 3 or 4 guys. And I think Stanford today really made a point to try to double him a lot. And if he's going to have this high usage rate, he's going to be getting a lot of attention. It doesn't always have to be, it's the open 3 that Indiana should get every time. I think there are other high efficiency type shots at the rim or more in the paint that they can get, and that might help balance out the lack of 3-point shooting if they're just getting high percentage looks otherwise.
Hey, it's Jared, just jumping in here real quick so that we can talk about Home Field Apparel, your friends at homefieldapparel.com. Christmas is coming up. You need to do your Christmas shopping, and homefieldapparel.com is definitely a stop that you need to make, both for the IU fans on your Christmas list, but also for anybody else, because it's not just IU stuff that they have right now, and they do have the best line of IU apparel, football logos, basketball logos. I mean, they have so much great stuff there for the IU fans on your list, but also they have over 90-plus schools. So, Home Field Apparel's whole thing is they go and they dig into the archives of different colleges and universities, pull out these old logos and brand marks that haven't been used in a while, put them on the comfiest material, whether it's the t-shirts, the sweatshirts, whatever it is. Their material is so comfy, so nice, so high quality, and you're going to find something for everybody. So go to homefieldapparel.com, use our promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, and you will get 20% off your entire order. So the IU page for all the IU apparel, and then you can browse all the other colleges and universities, and you're sure to find something for pretty much everybody on your Christmas list. Because even if you have someone on your Christmas list that didn't go to one of the colleges or universities Home Field does, they have so many cool, unique logos, you could probably find something for that person anyway. And if nothing else, just get them a comfortable hoodie or the comfortable joggers. I mean, it's such comfortable stuff. Gets you ready for the wintertime. Go do it now. Homefieldapparel.com. Use that promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K. You will get 20% off your entire order. That's homefieldapparel.com. Promo code B-R-I-N-K. All right, now back to Alex and Ryan.
From today's game specifically, I don't know how much we can really learn from reliving the Texas game. Everyone knows it was historically bad shooting performance, but the thing that impressed me the most, I think today, and how Indiana responded was the play of Race Thompson was obviously tremendous against Providence and didn't do much against Texas, but he bounced back in a major way in today's game against Stanford. His line was really good. I mean, 15 points, 8 rebounds, 4 block shots, 3 assists. This looks like to me a situation where even when Joey Brunk is healthy again and is able to come back to the team and in the rotation, that Race Thompson is going to be the guy up front. And the other guy that looked really good to me today was Armond Franklin. I mean, he wasn't great in terms of his shooting percentage and the turnovers. I mean, he was, I think, 4 of 10 total from the field, missed all of his 3-point attempts, but he got to the line 6 times, made 5 of them, had three turnovers, as I mentioned, but in other ways, 8 rebounds, 5 assists with Al Durham out, and we don't know how long term of an injury that's going to be. I think it's really important for him to kind of step up, and that was easily, in my opinion, the best game that Armond Franklin has played in an IU uniform.
Yeah, and I think after the game, Miller was very complimentary of him, and he just it sounds like having a full year in the system last year and the work he put in the summer, and he just seems to have raised his game and maybe even a little bit of recognizing what it takes to play at this high level. And he's more game to either put in the work or just know what it takes. And the fact that, again, I think he didn't come out all this entire game. And
40 minutes.
Yeah. And Miller had pointed to the fact that I think he asked if he wanted to spell once or twice or a couple times, maybe even more than that. And he basically was like, no, I'm good. So I think that's a good attitude to see from him, especially with, Durham being out, him kind of rising to that task. I mean, it wasn't a flawless performance, but they needed someone else that was off the perimeter that was going to be able to drive and either, get fouled, score, attract the defense to open things up in other places on the court. And he certainly was able to do that today, which I think was big because, also thinking about the rest of the perimeter players of the backcourt, and, Phinisee has shot it well from 3. He's only taken 6. He's made 4. So he, right now he's kind of the high man in terms of percentage from beyond the arc, but still feeling like that, those Rob Phinisee games or and I know he's dealt with injuries in his first 2 seasons, but just feeling a little quiet in terms of his contributions. And so it was good to see Franklin step up because, right now, other than this 3-guard lineup that they've been starting, it's freshman and Jerome Hunter, right? And so there needs to be, and that, Hunter has had a little bit of a rough start to the season, and they're otherwise relying on freshmen. So getting someone, a sophomore in Franklin, to be able to kind of step up and perhaps be a little bit more consistent than they might get off the bench is good as well.
Yeah, you look at today's box score, and I think it's pretty surprising that Indiana was able to beat a team that's in the top 30 of Ken Palm by 16 points when they didn't have Al Durham, they didn't have Joey Brunk. And, I mean, you look at their bench today. I mean, they played Anthony Leal 19 minutes. He took one shot. Didn't obviously give him much offensively. Khristian Lander, who I think we want to talk about a little bit later in the show. But, he 18 minutes for him. He had 5 points, but he continues to take some, I think, head-scratching shots early in his career, and that's something he's obviously going to have to improve upon it. And Jerome Hunter plays 14 minutes and scores 4 points, so you get 9 bench points, and you don't have your two seniors, and you still win by 16 over a team that's picked. I think finished in the top 3 or 4 of the Pac-12. I think it's a pretty good win. I mean, do you have any concerns just kind of about, I feel like one of the things I talked about a lot in the preseason was, Indiana having 11 guys that I felt like could all play and contribute. And now, we're 4 games into the season, and I'm looking around at some of what guys are actually contributing from a statistical perspective. And I'm wondering if maybe I jumped the gun on kind of touting this depth, because the reality of today was there was 3 guys that basically carried the load from a statistical standpoint.
Sure. And, to your point of being able to beat a team by 16, and you kind of look through the box score, and that's why it helps to have a star like Trayce Jackson-Davis, right? Because if you can get a guy to go 30 plus, they got to the line a ton. That's all, I forget what 20 and 25 from the line. Obviously he shot, I think, half of those, maybe 11.
More than half.
Yeah.
He shot 14.
Yeah. So, oh, wow. He had 14 of the 20. So yeah, another 9 points there. So it's over half their points from the line and from him. I think I'm doing the math right there, but so yeah, that can help you a lot too. Like having, it's very simple. It's not like this is some amazing point I'm making here, but when you have a star player and that can be consistent, or that can throw up 30, it can go a long way.
For sure.
So that's why I think if this offense is going to have, and there is a risk with that too, right? Because if he has an off game, or some of these Big Ten teams are going to be able to scout Indiana, and they can take some of his stuff away, that's when it can get a little dicey, especially if guys aren't hitting shots around him. But if they're able to work through him enough, and get some good looks off of what he attracts, and then he can keep racking up these numbers, it seems to me to sort of, I think they were going to be in the tournament last year, all things considered, looks like.
Yeah.
I think this year, even if the shooting still isn't great, it does feel like there's enough else to at least potentially raise them into a group where, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself a bit with this comment, but they seem to be in a spot where they'll maybe be more comfortably in the tournament. I don't know if they're going to challenge for a Big Ten championship. I think that's unlikely. Obviously, like a deep run in the tournament is probably unlikely, but I think if they can keep having a defense that plays this well, and the offense can kind of find him as the focal point, and there's enough else there, even if the 3-point shooting isn't a ton improved, it feels like to me that there's just a little bit more to work with this team, even if there's still a long way to go offensively in some ways. And then, secondarily, just thinking about the bench and knowing that it is pretty freshman reliant right now. Although I don't know, like Galloway has been, I think, a pleasant surprise, and he started in place of Durham today, and I think the reason Miller seems to trust him because he seems to bring the same level of intensity, and he plays really hard, and he doesn't seem to be afraid of the moment as a freshman in a way that I think a typical freshman, or even some of the other freshmen in this class, can kind of sometimes fall victim to.
Yeah. I mean, there's I think I mentioned this to you the other day on chat during one of the games. There's a little she-he in him in terms of just not like he's one of those guys who doesn't seem to care like who he's playing against, or if there's a guy older than him, if there's a guy that was higher ranked in terms of rankings, a guy that's supposed to be better than him, he's still going to kind of bring the same approach. Now, sometimes I think there was, I don't know if it was yesterday's game or today's game, where he kind of drove in and just kind of just got a shot blocked, and it was kind of like a, hey, welcome to college moment for him. Yeah. And he's going to have some more of those. But I think you like, if you're a coach, you like to have a kid that comes in with little fear and someone that feels like they belong, rather than someone that's playing timid and feels maybe a little bit what we've seen from Anthony Leal so far is almost like he's afraid to make a mistake, and sometimes you just have to go out there and let it rip, right? I mean, other guys are taking a lot of 3-pointers and not making them. I think at some point Anthony Leal, if he's going to be out there, especially if Durham's going to be out for an extended amount of time, they need to figure out a way to get him some shots. I want to go back to Phinisee for a second, and I kind of just have a big picture question, because I've been one of his I don't want to say biggest supporters, because obviously I cover the team. I'm not supporters of any of these players, but going back to his high school career, I thought that he would be a guy that by the end of his career could be maybe not an all Big Ten type player, but a really, really good college player. And his first 2 years, he's obviously had some injury problems and just kind of various things that have come up. And I felt like this season coming in many ways was really important for him, especially with Lander coming in behind him to kind of, make a leap forward. And the first 3 games, he was, I think a total of eight assists, no turnovers. Today, his game, he hit 2 big 3-pointers. I think a lot of people maybe forget that, but in the second half, he hit, I think, 2 in a row, or, 2 in a couple of possessions that really kind of boosted their lead back up that were important. But he had 5 turnovers. And I just wonder, this is kind of an open-ended question. You can kind of go any way you want with it, but do you think it's ever going to click with him, or is this kind of what he is as a player at this point?
Yeah, well, certainly the start to this year, it's not like there are big signs of sort of a breakthrough or of him playing at a consistent high level. But it's the very beginning of a very strange year in college basketball. And, they didn't have as much ramp up time. They didn't have these exhibition games. It's also a little bit of I think at times in his first 2 years, there was a large reliance on him doing a lot with the ball and really creating. And I feel like this year, I think Durham has the ability to do that. Franklin has shown, today, I think he showed that ability. Lander is, you can tell he, right now he is playing like a kid that is up a grade. And, but that said, he's super talented, and I think he has good court vision, and there might come a time this year when he's sort of settled down a bit. I think today he was kind of getting a little bit hard on himself for some of the things that were happening out on the court. And Franklin at one point, I think, kind of talked to him to settle him down a bit. But I just wonder if as you're saying, Phinisee did seem to be the type of recruit coming in that was going to be that very, very strong 4-year point guard that his senior year would be, maybe not going to be a pro or at least an NBA pro, but was going to be very, very good. And I don't know if he's ever going to get there, but I think the reliance on him having to do that with some other playmakers and kind of a 3-guard lineup this year, maybe he doesn't need to be what we kind of envisioned him to be. And honestly, again, it's 6 shots he's taken from behind the arc, but I almost wonder if the way that this offense going forward, maybe he's, he can be on the ball at times, but at other times, if they're going to try to be a better 3-point shooting team, I think it's important that, he gets in the mix for that. To me right now, looks the smoothest shooting from out there.
Yeah.
For me, it's like him, Durham, and then other than that, I'm not really sure who I trust to be taking threes on the team. And so the more that he gets, and, it's not like this is an offense that is always hunting for 3-pointers, but that might be more of an important role for him this year than, being Yogi Ferrell 2.0.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was ever fair to think he was going to be Yogi Ferrell 2.0, but the thing about kind of what you just said, if he's not going to be a guy with the ball in his hands a lot and you're going to start him, I mean, you obviously have him out there for defense in large part because he's a really good defender, I think.
True.
I mean, he's shown that over his career, even when he's been hurt. He had a couple of games the last couple of years where he played great defense on Cassius Winston, and that was a big reason that Indiana beat Michigan State a couple times. But if he's not going to have the ball in his hands creating, I think I agree with what you just said in terms of getting him open and trying to get him in situations where he can spot up, because those 2 threes that he shot today and made, those were 2 of the better looking shots outside of like 15 feet that Indiana had all of this event. I mean, you watch some of the threes that they took in this tournament. I mean, Jerome Hunter missed some that were terribly missed. Khristian Lander, same thing. I mean, he's one of those guys that it's almost like Phinisee should be looking for that shot more, and Lander should be looking for it a lot less.
Exactly. And
you wonder why. My thing with Phinisee is he doesn't just doesn't seem comfortable being assertive offensively. And I don't know if that's something he's being coached to do or if that's just kind of his natural disposition, kind of what he thinks his role is. But he should be taking more shots, in my opinion, and he should be looking to get in the lane and get to the basket as much as possible, because that's one thing that I feel like, he's not a super athlete or anybody that's going to dunk on anybody or overpower them at the rim, but I do feel like he, when he gets going to the basket, does a pretty good job finishing plays. He can shoot free throws at a pretty decent rate, and like you said, I mean, his stroke looked pretty good from the perimeter. And if Indiana is going to only have Al Durham that can make a 3 all season, that's to me going to be problematic. So we'll see. I think it's too early, obviously, to make any big judgments, but at this point right now, I just wonder if what we've seen out of Rob Phinisee is going to be kind of, this is kind of it. Like what we're seeing is what we're going to get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, it's early, but there are some other ways that I think he can be used that could be helpful.
With Lander, what have you thought so far? I know obviously I tweeted that kind of his shot selection hasn't been great. His offensive rating is the lowest on the team I'm seeing right now. Well, it's a little bit higher than Anthony Leal, but he's obviously played a lot more. You mentioned 2 of 13 from 3 and 1 of 5 on 2s is not great.
Yeah, I think with him, he's just not playing within the flow of the offense. And I don't know if that's because everything's a little fast for him or he's just used to kind of playing a different style or playing at a different level. But he just really sticks out in terms of the looks that he's taking. There are a lot of quick shots from him too, right? It's early in the possession or so I just think the decision-making in terms of when he's getting a shot up could be vastly improved. That said, I know in Maui, in Asheville, but Maui Invitational, he wasn't great, but against Tennessee Tech, there were some passes he made where you're like, wow, this is really high level stuff. And he certainly has that ability. I just think right now, and I had mentioned this a little bit earlier too, where I think he's starting to get a little bit down and frustrated, probably because these shots aren't going down. And it's just kind of coming up a year and playing at this level. He's just really raw right now. But, who knows? Maybe once the teeth of the Big Ten season hits, he's kind of figured out how to play within the context of college basketball a little bit better. And I still think he's a pretty big X factor for this team because he can move. He's got great court vision. And to me, his shot doesn't actually look bad.
Yeah.
I think his shot looks pretty good. I just think he's doing it within a completely other context than he should be. And again, the fact that he's taken the most threes on this team is for the amount of minutes he's played and just sort of how he's getting them. It's very clear that it's not within the really much in the flow of the game right now.
No, I don't think it's by design at all, but I think it's very early for him, and the fact that he still should be in high school, and he's still figuring out a way to contribute in some way. I mean, I think the best thing for him is to continue to get this experience because later in the season, I think it could pay huge dividends because there's no question that he's talented and that he can do a lot of things with the ball, and his passing, I think his vision's been pretty good. But I agree, his shot selection so far has not been good. One other guy that I wanted to mention who was virtually invisible in these games, Jerome Hunter, who played 8 minutes against Providence and fouled out, which just not a good game for him. And then against Texas, he played 17 minutes, scored 4 points, another forgettable performance. And then today he plays 14 minutes and scores 4 points. I think he was a guy that a lot of people were looking at as a potential breakout candidate, myself included. And as I watch him, I still kind of wonder where he's at from a confidence perspective and just being comfortable out there because he's clearly not the player that he was in high school. I mean, I watched him. I think it was the spring of 2017. There was a tournament down in Dallas that Indiana was watching him down there, and I was down there watching him, and he looked like a guy that was on his way to an NBA career. And then obviously things his freshman year in Bloomington were cut short due to an injury, and it just feels like he's not comfortable out there. Do you kind of agree with that? And he's in many ways, I feel like he's going to be potentially important this season if he can get some of that confidence back and maybe show that he can make a perimeter shot. He's another guy that I was looking at entering the season. You looked at Al Durham, you knew he was probably going to be a threat from the perimeter, but kind of in that next tier of guys that I thought could help Indiana from a shooting perspective, Jerome Hunter was right there on that list.
No, absolutely. I think in terms of, kind of the next man up in terms of being able to hit a three consistently, I think you definitely put him on that list. And I think to your point, I completely agree that it does seem to be a bit of a confidence thing right now. And, I feel like in the way that they're trying to use him. And I'm sure what he, worked on this offseason too is it's like he's going to be a 3-point shooter for Indiana, but there's also these times when he's in the lane and there's, either he drives in or he played a little bit. Was it against Texas? Maybe he had a post bucket, but there's some jump hook action in the lane that I think he's working on a bit too. So it's almost like coming from where he had to come from after his freshman year. And it's almost, it's like he's trying to do both things, but not doing either of them at as high a level as he maybe could. So it does seem, especially falling out as quickly as he did against Texas, it seems to be a confidence thing and just a rhythm thing and a sort of just still trying to figure out where he fits in with all this. But I kind of think like, obviously he's played a lot more college basketball than Lander, but I think Lander and Hunter to me are, again, two X factors where I don't expect Jerome Hunter to play this way the rest of the season. I think, and Miller spoke to this in one of the press conferences too, I think it was after Texas, that he's better than this. And I think he showed that this offseason and has just kind of come into these games and it just hasn't quite clicked for him. But I expect him to have a few games where he's important for Indiana and he's hitting a couple threes, maybe getting to the line a bit. But yeah, right now in this invitational, he just didn't really have it.
From, I mentioned him earlier, but I'm just kind of curious what you've thought of Race Thompson so far. Have you been surprised at just how athletic and how different he looks in terms of how he's played kind of around the basket and finished plays? He just looks like he's regained a lot of the athleticism that was not there the past couple of years due to various injuries, and his confidence and his leadership on the court seemed like they've really taken a step forward.
Oh yeah, most definitely. I think he's been you could see some shades of this last year that he might be able to kind of work into this. I mean, he was basically kind of basically a starter by the end of last season. And obviously he's a much more confident player. I think that's very easy to tell in these first four games, especially against Providence. And good to see too that when the whole team dipped against Texas, and his numbers certainly went way down, that basically he was able to bounce right back and still have a really good game. And honestly, he's only taken 2, and I think today was the day that he made his 3-pointer, and he's hit a couple, like mid-range, some like baseline jumpers. His shot looks very good as well. And, I'm not sitting here saying that he should be taking way more threes, but if he's going to be a more confident player all around, he might be another one that maybe he's not taking a ton, but that might be another facet if Indiana's struggling to find 3-point shooters. It's possible he could get in the mix a little bit as well. But yeah, I've certainly been very impressed with how he's played, but at the same time, I think he's following a trajectory that he kind of started a bit last year. And actually, I'm wondering, and I kind of thought this coming into the season, to me, it seems like he can be more, in fact, impactful than a Joey Brunk. And It seems to me that, race and trace, as Bill Walton was saying many times on this broadcast, that to me seems like the highest ceiling for a front court. But then what a luxury when Brunk is, I know he's working through this back injury now and maybe could even played a game or two in the tournament. But I think if that's what ultimately ends up happening, if Brunk's a backup, or even if it's Race coming up, I think the three of them are pretty dang good front court.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, kind of going back to like what you said about Race in terms of the ceiling, I think the same thing kind of holds true for Jerome Hunter coming off the bench. I think you'd much rather have I think the ceiling of this team is higher if Jerome Hunter's playing well, rather than having to depend on Trey Galloway and Anthony Leal and Jordan Geronimo. So, I think this team can be at its best when it has its most experienced players playing the biggest roles, and so that's you hope that kind of going down the line here that obviously not going to be the same impact, I don't think, as Race Thompson, but Jerome Hunter can kind of try to find his role and get more comfortable out there. What's your impression been? Obviously neither one of us have been at a game this year, and probably won't be at any games this year. But what's like? You typically watch the games on TV anyway, so this has been an adjustment for me, just kind of being at home watching these games. But have you noticed anything different, like in terms of just the atmospheres? Have you been is the viewing experience much different for you watching these games with no fans there?
I don't think so, really. I think the level of play to me seems just as it would be as if there are fans in the stands for a neutral court tournament. I think once we flip over into Big Ten season and there are no fans in Assembly Hall, Although I guess it hasn't always been the greatest home court advantage the last couple of seasons. There's been some wins from the opponent. But
yeah,
I just think Big Ten wide, that's when I will probably notice that there isn't, the paint crew or, any of these student sections going crazy. And that I think will probably be more noticeable. But for right now, I really don't notice much difference. And there is sort of had this been earlier in the year before any other sports had started, I might find it pretty bizarre. But having the NBA be in the bubble and there's, football's playing. I mean, basically every sport said we're forging ahead. Yeah. So, knowing that and obviously watching some of those other sports as well, it's kind of a thing where this is just what it is. And just as the players and coaches have adjusted to it, so too as the viewer. Although I will say sometimes I wish I'm listening a little bit closer, although I guess, when Bill Walton's talking so much you can't hear at times, but you can definitely hear more on the court.
Yeah.
Both what the players are saying and what the coaches are saying. So that's kind of one thing that's interesting and might be, kind of another window. And I'm sure if you're there and there are no fans, you could really hear that. Right. So
yeah,
I think that's kind of an interesting part of it. Just kind of the speaking where if you're in assembly hall, you're usually not able to hear that stuff because the crowd is kind of drowning that out. Right.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some interesting stuff too once you get into conference play, because I think there's going to be certain venues that try to do things to kind of give a home court advantage. Like, for example, a team goes to take a free throw or something, and maybe you do play crowd noise and amp it up to the highest allowable level. But yeah, I agree. It hasn't been all that different watching, but I'm sure for the people that are actually there, it's pretty bizarre. And I don't know, we haven't had a ton of time to ask the players about this because obviously we only get a couple minutes with them after each game, but it has to be for them too a pretty big adjustment. Not necessarily maybe at this neutral court situation, but I think for Indiana, it's going to take a lot of getting used to playing in a gym that normally has 15, 16,000 people.
Yeah.
All of a sudden there's going to be nobody there.
Yeah, it's more having to create your own energy. And I you notice it a little bit more in these broadcasts too, I think, because there are no fans, but your team has to be the fans, right? And This actually was something that I know happened a bit in the NBA bubble as well, where, and maybe it's just some of the guys that were on their bench, but I know it at times it almost had a little bit of like a pickup atmosphere where, the guys that are on the Lakers bench, like a J.R. Smith and them, they were the ones that were sort of taunting the other team during free throws and things of this nature, right? So, and I'm not saying that's going to be happening in the Big Ten, but that's another component where it's kind of different than a large group of people doing it. If there's just two or three or one person sort of trying to yell at you and mess you up when you're shooting, that's a little bit different than what a player might be used to. I don't know if teams are going to be doing that or if that's already happening, but with no one else in, or with a very, very limited amount of spectators, the teams can almost become the crowd or the either to pump the team up or to be sort of their antagonists if it's the opposition.
Yeah, I hope they let some of that stuff happen because otherwise it's going to be pretty boring watching benches kind of just sit there all season and no atmosphere. The other thing that's been a pleasant surprise, and obviously this can all change at any point, but kind of leading up to the days, and we talked about this, when we chat on Google every day, but I was pretty concerned just about the season getting underway and getting started, because as the season got closer, you saw all these teams that were getting a positive test and shutting down, and I think I saw a stat yesterday on Twitter. I think it was Andy Wittry that he did some research looking at just the percentage of games played so far, like in terms of what was scheduled to what actually got played. And I think 79% have been played, which obviously it's not great that 21% of games are getting canceled or postponed at this point, but it's actually a little bit higher than kind of what I expected going in. Have you been, and obviously we would be having a totally different conversation if Indiana was one of these teams. Like I think Florida State hasn't even played a game yet, who Indiana plays, I think, next week. They're still waiting to play their first games. But have you been surprised at how, this has been able to, and I'm not saying it's working or anything at this point because we don't know it's so early, but it seems to me that this is going to forge ahead.
Yeah, it's sort of just the show must go on. I mean, the reality is the NCAA tournament was not played last year, and there was a lot of money that was lost because of that. And to have that happen 2 years in a row would be pretty devastating. So I think there are a lot of business interests that are involved with some of these decisions, right? And there are some contingencies sort of built in the way that some of the scheduling has been done if there needs to be a postponement or cancellation or what have you. But I think even if there are, if that 80% or the 79% number drops to 70,
yeah,
we just kind of keep going. Not that I'm just sort of seeing the bigger picture stuff. I don't follow the NFL that much, but just seeing what's happening with the NFL, where they kind of just came in, I think, a little bit more, maybe stronger than college basketball did, or really any other sport. It was just like sort of
not changing anything.
Yeah, ignoring the public health issues and just kind of forging ahead. And so I'm seeing there that I think some of these Thanksgiving games, there were a ton of kind of COVID cases, and maybe one had to get pushed back. And, Denver didn't even have like a true quarterback that played for them, I think, last week. So there's even some like weird competitive advantages stuff that that just is what it is. And you just keep going. Right. So that's what I would expect this year. But as you said, who knows?
Yeah. I don't know exactly who had the stat. Let me see if I can pull it up here. It was True Hoop that tweeted earlier today, Henry Abbott, a couple hours ago. So the NBA and the MPBA announced of the 546 players tested for COVID during the initial return to market testing phase, 48 have returned positive tests. So 8.7% of NBA players have tested positive re-entering. So they're going to, it's going to be interesting to see how that works. Yeah. Obviously, don't want to get into an NBA discussion, but I will say this. I'll give the Big Ten credit for this. From a testing perspective, you can say whatever you want about the Big Ten in terms of how they handled football, whether it was the right or wrong approach. But in terms of what they're doing with basketball, the daily testing, I think, is a real positive. I wish more programs, at least the ones that have the resources to do it, would kind of jump on board with that and do that. So, I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer to any of this. Everyone's going to have their opinion on whether they should or should not be playing. Ultimately, I think, the players do have the choice to not play if they don't wish to. And obviously everyone's for IU at least, and most of the other major programs are playing at this point. So we'll see how it all shakes out in the end. I agree with you that there's a ton of pressure from a financial standpoint for the NCAA to get the tournament going. But I also think for the players, it's a good thing if we can do it as safely as possible for them to play, because a lot of these kids have worked their whole lives for this opportunity. They got the tournament taken away from them last year. And so to not give them an opportunity, at least to try to play a season this year, I think would have really been, a tough pill to swallow for a lot of those kids, in which I understand obviously the public health side of it too. So I don't know that there's a right or a wrong answer, but I'm just glad that basketball is back. Ryan, what kind of are you looking forward to maybe here over the next couple weeks? Obviously Big Ten play is going to be here. I think Indiana's first Big Ten game is 3 weeks from tonight, which that's hard to believe.
Yeah,
December 23rd, and,
yeah.
and then they play the day after Christmas at Illinois. So the games, there's a little bit of a lull here in the schedule. They've got, I think, at Florida State, then a home game. It's scheduled against North Alabama and Butler. So between now and December 19th, they'll play just 3 games, and so it'll slow down a little bit. But then once Big Ten play gets going, it's gonna come quick, and we'll see how Indiana's ready. But I think in terms of the schedule they play leading up to conference play, they're going to be as prepared as anybody.
Yeah, and I think I'm kind of most interested in seeing a week from now on the 9th against Florida State, it being an away game, what that looks like. Again, in terms of us talking about the crowd and there not being nearly as many people in the stadium, if that game usually would be, Indiana's at a much more of a disadvantage not playing the game in Assembly Hall, but will it be noticeable, especially for the freshmen that are getting significant minutes for Indiana, their first true road game in an opponent's arena, whether it matters as much as it usually does? I think that'll be interesting to see. It may give some clues to what is in store for the Big Ten season as well.
For sure. Well, thanks everybody, as always, for listening to Podcast on the Brink. We will be back next week with another episode. Thanks to you, Ryan, as well, for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon.